Our speaker today is Dr. Patty Loew, a professor in the Medill School of Journalism and director of the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research at Northwestern University. She earned her master's and Ph.D. degrees from the UW-Madison and was previously a professor at the UW-Madison. Many of you will remember that she is also a former broadcast journalist in public and commercial television. In 1999, Dr. Loew was recipient of our Manfred Swarzynski Humanitarian Service Award, an award which we mentioned earlier in our agenda. She's author of a book titled Indian Nations of Wisconsin, Histories of Endurance and Renewal. Dr. Loew will share her journey from the UW-Madison to directing Northwestern University's new Center for Native American and Indigenous Research. We look forward to your presentation, Dr. Loew, and we've made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. So, thank you very much.
As luck would have it, thank heavens I sent the PowerPoint presentation to Jane last night because Northwestern is migrating all of its technology to the cloud. So I have my presentation, but I can't access my notes. So who knows what I'm going to say? How bad could it be? But for those of you who know a little something about the University of Wisconsin system, you know about the Wisconsin idea, right? It's this notion that the knowledge that is generated at the university needs to be spread throughout it used to be just the boundaries of the state, but now it's really the boundaries of the planet, and maybe even beyond. In my case, I kind of feel like I had to move to Illinois in order to promote the Wisconsin idea, which is a little ironic. Hold on just a second. Technology. Okay, so UW-Madison, I am a Badger. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, went to public schools there. Went to the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, got my bachelor's in communications, then worked in media in La Crosse and Madison, came back after spending a little bit of time out west and got my master's degree and my Ph.D. working for WKOW at the time and redeeming myself in public television. Then after I finished my degree, I wound up getting a tenure track position at UW-Madison with an appointment in UW Extension, which holds the license for Wisconsin Public Television. And then I retired in 2017. I can talk more about that, the reasons for that. But my retirement didn't last long. In fact, it lasted about a half an hour. 2017, I was offered really for someone like me who has always sort of had a problem with what constitutes Native American research, which has been typically research done on Native Americans. My vision of research has always been the kind of research that is done in collaboration with Native Americans. I can't tell you how often I see the kind of research that really is not very meaningful in Indian country. Somebody finds a diary of a white woman in Massachusetts in the 1600s who was kidnapped by Indians, and here's a journal article. I can promise you that in all my years of working in Indian country, I have never gone into a community and said, hey, I'm from the University of Wisconsin, you know, what do you need? Nobody has ever said to me, you know what we need, Patty? We need a peer-reviewed journal article and a top-tier research journal. So the reason I came back to graduate school was really I knew that in order to write grants, to do the kind of outreach that I was interested in doing, I needed a Ph.D. And so I I have my phone here, so I know what slides are coming next. So when Medill approached me and Northwestern offered me the position of inaugural director at its new Center for Native American Research, they asked me, what are your goals? And I said, have no idea. And I knew they probably thought, geez, what the heck are we offering her a job if she doesn't know what she wants to do? But I told them, that's been the problem. Academia thinks it knows what's best for Indian country and the kind of research that ought to be done. I'm not going to do anything my first year except build relationships and listen to Native communities and find out what do they want from this wonderful institution, and then I'll tell you what my goals are and the goals that I recommend to the university. So that was the approach I took, and so there I was going from Badger to, well, still a Badger. Hashtag still a Badger. My husband bought me the House Divided hat, and my first day in Medill, I was introduced to my new colleagues by my dean, and it happened to be like 2 days before the Northwestern-Wisconsin game at Northwestern. And so one of my colleagues said, so you going to the game on Saturday? And I said, yes, I am. And they said, what side are you sitting on? And I said, I'm sitting on the Northwestern side. And everybody went, yay! And I said, because the Wisconsin side was sold out. So for those of you that know a little bit about Native Americans, we like our medicine wheel. And the colors represent the 4 colors of humankind and the 4 directions. And so I've sort of oriented our new center with the help of a lot of great colleagues toward that. And so again, relationship building is huge. And I'm not even going to worry about this. I'm just going to, do my thing here. So to me, it seemed like the best kind of education is the education that combines research, teaching, outreach, and service. I think there's a way to do that in academia. And so that's kind of the way I approached setting up this center. Relationship building, one of our key audiences and key communities of service was the tribal nations of the Midwest. So I spent a lot of time introducing myself to people around campus in departments and programs that I thought would be amenable to thinking about Native people. So the usual suspects: history, anthropology, sociology, ethnic studies. But I found some really interesting alliances in departments I wasn't really thinking about, like astronomy. And there were a couple of people there who were really interested in some of the Navajo star culture. And there was one woman who was really interested in getting more women into STEM, particularly astronomy and physics, and girls of color. And she was interested in doing work on the middle school level. And so we invited, I started where I knew, for me, a comfort zone, started with my own reservation. And we brought a group of 10 middle school girls to Northwestern. They camped out in the Dearborn Observatory and shared star stories with the scientists in Northwestern's department. And the scientists shared the Western knowledge of behind some of those stories. It was really a wonderful exchange. I have, the other target community that we're interested in doing some relationship building is with the urban Indian community in Chicago. And there are, at least the people that go to the American Indian Center, mostly, it seems, tribal members from Oneida, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, people in Wisconsin. So that was a really comfortable territory for me to begin introducing myself and do some relationship building. And I think we were successful. We have a number of research projects now with the American Indian Center. We have community collaboratives, bringing educators and community groups together. They asked us to host the 2017 American Indian Center Powwow at Northwestern, and so that's a relationship that seems to be thriving at this point. I have some colleagues, including a superstar in the world of traditional ecological knowledge in the form of Dr. Megan Bang, who's Ojibwe and Italian, who we enticed back to Northwestern. She had her Ph.D. there and then went out west to the University of Washington. She's doing some really groundbreaking work in science education. And she and another colleague of hers at Northwestern, in collaboration with the Menominee Nation, are doing some really important work. Up until third grade, the sort of standardized tests show that Menominee kids are really smart when it comes to environmental knowledge. And then there's just some, and why wouldn't they be? I mean, this is a community that lives pretty close to the land, and there are a lot of people that find subsistence from the land on the Menominee Reservation, so why wouldn't they? But somehow, by the time they get to fifth grade, their connection to science is breaking down to the point where by the end of their high school and college, well, usually high school experience, they have some of the lowest science scores and in standardized testing. And there are very, very few Native people that go on to college in general, but in particular, virtually no one goes into the sciences. So this is some research that we hope is really going to make a difference. Because right now, you may have noticed, if you're reading news about some of the environmental issues that are going on right now, Native communities are really under siege. Pipelines, gold mines, factory farms. For some reason, we seem to have, our water is still clean, and we have land that's undeveloped, and so there's lots of people that are interested in us now, and we don't have the scientific capacity to understand what's sustainable and what's a good deal for us. And then I'm involved in a project with 3 Ojibwe bands and the National Park Service. For the last 12 years, through a generous grant, initially from the Morgridge Institute for Public Service, and I feel like I just want to do a slight little bow there. Wonderful organization in Wisconsin, tremendous research. They're funding a lot of really important outreach in our state in the form of public service. So the Morgridge Center gave me seed money to start a tribal youth media workshop. And some colleagues and I, initially from UW-Madison and now Northwestern, teach Native kids communication skills. We teach them how to shoot professional video, design web pages, compose digital music, and we ask them to explore an environmental issue, gathering traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, from their grandmas and grandpas and aunties, and science from scientists, Native scientists in the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. So when the Park Service was interested in gathering TEK to help inform their management plans and for inclusion in their technical reports, it seemed like it was pretty easy to pivot my program toward this grant. And Red Cliff and Lac du Flambeau are doing something similar now, where we're interviewing our elders about traditional ecological knowledge, and the tribal historic preservation officers are deciding what can be shared and what can't be shared. So I want to give you an example. This was and this is why you should wait until the frogs chirp before you spear fish in the spring.
When I first graduated college, and I became director of the Lacouture Conservation Department, and I was really serious about my job, you know. One of my duties was to manage our spring spearing, our walleye spearing harvests. And it's an expensive thing because of the court case. We have to count and measure every fish that we harvest. And generally, it costs about $5,000 per lake because we have to have creel teams there, we have to have wardens there, and they work all through the night. And so it's expensive, so you want to do it as efficiently as possible. And I was serious about my job. So I'm monitoring the lakes. And when those lakes get 48 degrees, then fish are going to spawn. So I have my chief warden there, George Morrow. Love him, although he's a Chicago Bear fan. He came with me, and I'm brand new. And okay, this lake is 48 degrees. It's ready to open for spearing. Fish are going to spawn. And he said, no, this lake isn't ready yet because the frogs aren't chirping. And I said, what? Well, I thought he was, just BSing me. And here I am, I got a college degree, man. I'm not sure if he had high school. He was an older guy. And I opened the lake, and it was slow. It was slow, even though it was 48 degrees. And eventually the fish picked up. But on another lake, it's 48 degrees. And I'm ready to open that lake. And he said, but the buds aren't out on these pussy willows here. And I thought he was BSing me. Okay, so a couple years later, I was out harvesting fish with my cousin, and they were really hitting. They were hitting, and we were getting our fish real fast. And we stopped to count up our fish, because if you go one fish over, you get a fine, $75 for that fish. We're strict when it comes to our quotas. And we're counting, and my cousin says, hey, what's that noise? So I stopped to listen, and the light bulb went on. It was the frogs chirping. And I remembered the story, George Morrow telling me this lake ain't ready, the frogs aren't chirping. And I was like, whoa. And then from that day on, it's not just Western science. That traditional ecological knowledge is as valid as Western science.
Isn't that a sweet, yeah. And the interviews we've collected, shot by 14-year-old, 15-year-old kids. It's just wonderful connecting elders to these young people. But we've learned how you can tell whether you've trapped a muskrat in its house in the wintertime, so you don't have to stick your hand in icy water to see if there's a muskrat in there. You put a flag, and the flag goes down, then you know you've trapped a muskrat. I can tell you now the recipe, how much salt you need. And it helps if you float a hard-boiled egg in the salt mixture, and then you know how much salt to use and maple lean to smoke whitefish. We've learned how to make teas with sumac, not the poison sumac, the other sumac, which looks and tastes pretty much like Kool-Aid, not the James Jonestown Kool-Aid. And why you should always harvest rice in a straight line. There's just all these wonderful stories that we've collected, and our elders are proud to share them. They're delighted that people are interested in these stories. The kids are really engaged, because who doesn't, like a good story? And when we showed this year's interviews to the community on our final day at the workshop, our tribal chair was there. He actually had a tear in his eye as he was watching these and telling these kids, I don't know if you really know the value of what you've collected, but 100 years from now, there may be somebody your age who, wants to know about Bad River, and they'll come back and they'll find this archive and they'll really know who we are. And it's just absolutely beautiful. So that's the kind of research that I really like doing. Now I told you that I really like to combine teaching with research and outreach. And one of the things we'll be doing next month, this will be the third year that we've done this, is I take my Native American environmental issues in the media class to Oneida during the white corn harvest. And my students help harvest, shuck and braid corn with the Oneida, and it gets strung up in their barn. And along the way, it's really tedious work. You walk into the barn, and it's really daunting when you see a pile of corn that has to be shucked from the ceiling to the floor. But, there may be 30 chairs around, there's elders and kids, everybody's shucking, and the stories start flying and the songs start coming. And my students who initially are usually, this couldn't be, the Oneida Reservation and the White Corn Cooperative environment couldn't be more different than Michigan Avenue, in Chicago. So they're usually sort of shell-shocked initially, and then they get comfortable, and then they ask a lot of questions, and then they tell me afterwards it was the most wonderful experience they've had. To me, this is great. It's building social capital with the Oneida, who are now doing research projects with us. My students have a wonderful experiential learning activity. The woman who, the young woman in the red who's standing in the second row, did her honors thesis on food sovereignty using the Oneida as kind of a case study. The Oneida were thrilled. So research, outreach, teaching, and service, all wrapped up in one. To me, that's a really great holistic way of viewing learning. And then where's Waldo? You'll notice, remember hashtag still a Badger? You can see me on the left there wearing my Green Bay. It was a Green Bay Packer weekend at Oneida when we were there, and so half the people are in Green Bay Packer wear, and there I am. So hashtag still a Green Bay Packer owner. Yes. I get it. I get a lot of that. No matter how long I live in Chicago, I will never, ever, ever be a Bears fan. Do I have time for my Green Bay Packer Chicago Bear joke? All right, so there are these two little kids playing in Grant Park, Chicago, and this dog jumps out of the bushes and attacks one of the boys. And the other kid grabs a stick and smacks the dog over the head and saves his friend. And there was a reporter who happened to be walking by at just the right time. He's a Chicago Tribune reporter, back when they had their headquarters on Michigan Avenue. Now they've been booted out. Oh, I can't believe they're no longer there. Anyway, so the reporter from the Chicago Tribune is walking by. He sees the whole thing. He gets really inspired to write a story, but he's a sports guy, so everything is sort of filtered through sports. And he runs up to the little kid that smacked the dog over the head with the stick and said, Kid, I saw what you did. That's just amazing. How does this sound? Young Chicago Bear fan saves friend from vicious dog attack. And the boy said, well, that's nice, but I'm not a Chicago Bear fan. And the reporter says, you're in Grant Park, Chicago, what? Okay, all right. And he scribbles. Okay, young Minnesota Viking fan, braves all, saves friend from bad dog. And the kid says, well, that's nice too, mister, but I'm not a Green Bay Packer fan. And the reporter says, well, I'm under deadline. Just tell me, what team do you root for? And he goes, I'm a Green Bay Packer fan. The reporter brows furrow and he scribbles. Okay, how's this? Young cheesehead bastard murders beloved family pet. I just can't tell you how happy I am to be somewhere where people would laugh at that because. Okay, so the other thing that we've been doing with our center is to create a minor in Native American and Indigenous studies. It's been approved by all the powers that be. There's one sort of formality next month, but in fall of 2020, we'll have a new minor, and one of the things that we've done is we've tried to export our center model to Native American studies. And we're not forming a department. We've just been doing a lot of relationship building, and we've been offering enticements to departments to sort of retool some of their courses. We've been helping them with that. And the capstone class really, I think, it's a good example of the values that we're trying to hold in our center, and that is the last course that a student takes, we are going to embed them with a Native American organization, a Native tribe, or a Native serving institution, so that our students can put all the book learning they've done to good use and leave with an experiential learning that will help them should they ever decide to work in Indian country or go on to research in academia. One of the things that I learned, isn't this a nice drone shot? Actually, that's a helicopter shot, but that's our lovely campus on Lake Michigan there. When I listened to people and asked them, you know, what would you change? Native people in Chicago inevitably said, we're invisible. There are no federally recognized tribes in Illinois. They have all been, they were all driven out. And there's no curriculum. Now here in Wisconsin, we have Act 31, which is an educational mandate that requires all schools, public, private, whatever, to teach about Wisconsin Indian history, treaty rights, and sovereignty 3 times in the K-12 experience, and it sets up certification standards for teachers. There's nothing like that in Illinois. Consequently, children don't learn anything about Native Americans, or if they do, you know, it can be boiled down to Paleolithic hunters crossing the Bering Straits, which is a theory. It's only a theory. And then, you know, trading for maple syrup in the fur trade, and then you just kind of disappear. So one of the things that we thought we would do is start small and create an Indigenous tour of Northwestern. So we have 14 locations, these are just screen grabs. There's 2 tours actually. There's a virtual tour, so you can access that on your computer or your laptop or tablet. And you start at our visitor center, and then you can click on each of the points and learn a little bit about the intersection of Native history and Northwestern. So this stop, for example, the first stop is kind of a welcome and a land acknowledgement. Who are the Indigenous people here? And the second is really a description of pre-encounter. Who were here before settlers, before colonists, and what was their life like? There's this virtual tour, but we're also creating a walking tour. And I just came back from the Pekagan Band of Potawatomi, and John Loew, no relation, is a professor there. And we recorded the voices of Potawatomi people speaking their language. So when you go on the walking tour, you'll hear birds and insects, but you'll also hear the native voices of Potawatomi people. And the reason this is important is because there are some estimates that by the year 2040, 90% of the indigenous languages on the planet will be, I don't want to say extinct, because now we have the technology where we can record things, so there's always a chance that a language could come back. But by 2040, 90% of the world's indigenous languages will be dormant. Potawatomi, where this gentleman is from, they have 6 first speakers left. And the Menominee, I think, have 6 or 7. There is wholesale panic in Indian country over the loss of Indian languages. So we thought that this would be a way to sort of honor those languages, and so that our visitors hear what Potawatomi sounds like.
The tide of non-native immigration just was overwhelming. It was a tsunami. And so oftentimes what the U.S. government would do is it would send out its trade negotiators to notify the tribes that a treaty was going to be had. They would notify the leaders of the tribes if they could find them, and they would say, well, we need to meet in 3 days. So for instance, the Treaty of Chicago of 1833, they would come and they would say, well, in September we're going to meet, and you're going to cede the last of your land. and we're going to give you certain things for that. If the Indians responded with, no, we're not interested, they usually got the same answer, which was, we don't care whether you're interested or not. We're going to have treaty negotiations. This is your opportunity to negotiate your best deal or take nothing at all, because you're all going to be removed.
So we have stops like that where people will learn about the coercive nature of treaties and the Treaty of Chicago in particular. But there's some artistic stops. This is a work of stained glass in the Deering Library of 3 prominent Native chiefs, Tecumseh, Pontiac, and Black Hawk. And then some of it is just fun. There was a 1903 football game between the Carlisle Indians, Carlisle Indian Boarding School, and Northwestern, which Northwestern got, they got waxed, I guess, 28-0. But there were 2 Mohican Indians and a Creek Indian who had played for Carlisle that transferred to Northwestern and played. Well, one of the Mohican members would not suit up and play against his former teammates, so he sat out the game. But the All-American quarterback, who's a Mohican Indian from Wisconsin, wound up graduating with as the first Native American with a dental degree, and he moved to Puerto Rico and opened up a practice there. The fellow who wouldn't suit up became a Superior Court judge in the state of Washington and the mayor of Aberdeen. So there's just all this really interesting stuff. And sometimes, history doesn't have to hit you over the head with something that you're supposed to learn. Sometimes it just can be interesting and fun. And so these are all the people. It started with just me, but Northwestern has been hiring Native faculty. The center started with me and a program assistant, and now we have nearly 30 affiliates, which is exciting. And this is kind of my parting thought. What I've learned over the years is that we really need to shift our thinking away from what can we do for Native Americans and Indigenous students to make them fit in and be more successful. Maybe what we need to do is we need to think about what we have to do as institutions in order to become a place where Indigenous communities feel comfortable, where students feel comfortable, where Native communities trust, the kind of communities that Native Americans trust, and how we can become good partners. So, Che Miigwech, that means thank you in Ojibwe.
Thank you, Dr. Loew, for that presentation. There were no questions, but Dr. Loew has said she'll be here for a couple minutes if you'd like to come up and ask something. I want to remind you that next week our meeting on Wednesday will be at Alliant Energy Center, and we are adjourned.